Hello and welcome back to the Stronghold. The Magi here, and today we are going to talk about the best draft archetypes for us budget and free-to-play players, as well as how I make those evaluations and the broader aspects of the limited environment. But before we get into all that, this season, Duskmourn is focused on that horror genre and all of those fears that us 1/1 human tokens tend to share. But you know what I really find horrifying? Only 1/3 of the viewers that regularly watch my content have subscribed to the channel. So come on guys, take a moment, sub to the channel, support the content, and be sure to check your notification settings so you never miss out on a thing. Now, what were we talking about? Oh yeah, right. Before we get into the details of this particular set, it's important to understand the evaluation process that goes into these archetypes, because we, particularly as budget players, need to make sure that we're maximizing all of that marginal utility to get the very most out of our bang for our buck, so to speak. Way more important than it is for players that are not as budget minded. So there are three main factors that I use to evaluate a limited archetype, and they're not presented here in any particular order. And in fact, depending upon your limited environment, these will shift in relative importance. But first, I'd like to talk about value, and that is a concept that we deal with a lot as free-to-play and budget players. Here, we are specifically talking about the ability of a limited archetype to convert itself into a constructed deck, because otherwise we've drafted a bunch of cards that we might never really play again. Next up, let's talk about the accessibility of a particular archetype. And within that, there's a couple of factors here, as you can see. The first consideration is the depth of the archetype. Is this supported by a wealth, a broad depth of low rarity commons and uncommons that really make that archetype work? Or is it very dependent on just very select higher rarity cards, making it a little harder to pull off? Very often within a limited format, we start hearing about the very best deck or the very worst deck, and that affects the way people draft. So one of the issues that we need to be considering is the relative popularity of a deck. Is this going to be highly disputed within your draft pod where 3 or maybe even 4 players are trying to move towards that and making the cards that much harder to get? Or is this an archetype that people maybe aren't really giving enough justice to, or possibly even actively avoiding, making it wide open for that one player at the table to really take advantage of? And lastly is the issue of flexibility of the archetype. If things don't go to plan, and we all know sometimes that happens more often than we'd like to admit, how easily can we flex or pivot into another archetype or style? How well do those color choices interact with other combinations so that we can make those clutch shifts when we need to? The missing component here, of course, is performance. How well a particular archetype will do within the limited environment against the other cards in that pool and the other competing archetypes. Or to put it in simpler terms, will it win? While value oftentimes takes the front seat for us as a budget community and winning is less important, the reality is there is a component here for winning. If you are doing any sort of value draft or a token supported premium draft, really just one win makes drafting a better option than just buying packs. If you're outside of that value draft or token supported premium draft, really again you're looking at 2, maybe more like 2.5, depending upon where you are in the history of Arena, to make that endeavor more worthwhile than buying packs. So winning is an important component here and needs to be taken into account. In the end, all of these different factors and components come together, and I tend to sort the archetypes into three basic tiers. Of course, the top tier is the title of the video, Top 3 Archetypes. These are the ones that I feel like our budget community needs to be focused on for the various reasons that we have just covered. It is not necessarily the top 3 best performing archetypes overall. As we have explained, there are other factors that budget players need to be mindful of. On the other end of the spectrum, of course, we have the tier 3, the decks that I recommend that you pretty actively avoid because the majority of the time it's just not going to be very beneficial for you. That having been said, of course, on any given day, any given limited event, the colors might come together for you. You might get access to really bomb-tastic cards, and anything could be playable on any given day. The middle ground is what I lovingly refer to as the backup plans, things that are not necessarily one extreme or the other, but often make good fallback points when your tier 1 plans don't come together. Maybe a color dries up, maybe you open a bomb in pack 2 and you need to shift a little bit. Those backup plans can be exactly what saves a draft for you, as opposed to being all in on the top tier aspects. Sometimes it's better to shift into a backup plan and have an overall better performance. Now let's talk about the broader limited environment presented by Duskmourn. One of the most important things about any limited environment is understanding the combat tricks that are presented, because really nothing can ruin your limited experience like getting shut down in the red zone when you think you're okay to attack or block. So a few things you want to look out for. First, take a good look at all of those instants, particularly the ones that include the phrase "until end of turn." It's also important to understand the difference between a combat trick and straight up removal. Both are important, but they are very different things. When also considering combat tricks, you want to look at any permanents, particularly those at lower rarity, that include flash, because that can come down mid-combat and present a additional blocker or effect that you had not been counting on. One thing that is going to make the Duskmourn limited environment feel radically different is the mana fixing is so much better than what we had available to us in Bloomborough. Not only do we have a full 10 set of common dual lands that can situationally come into play untapped, we also have Terramorphic Expanse at our disposal, as well as an uncommon Keys to the House that allows you to search up a basic land card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. And of course, green brings a lot of mana fixing capabilities to the table as well, like the uncommon House Cartographer's survival ability allows you to reveal lands from your deck and put them into your hand. Spineseeker Centipede, similarly, when it ETBs, allows you to search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. And of course, there is the uncommon Overgrown Zealot that allows you to tap this 0/4 Elf Druid for 1 mana of any color, or add 2 mana of any color, spend this mana only to turn permanent space up. So all of those bound to see a lot of use from green. And of course, green wouldn't be done there because you get even more mana fixing potential in the form of 2 runes. The first, Moldering Gem for 3 mana. When it ETBs, you get to search up a basic land card from your library and put it directly onto the battlefield. However, it will be tapped. Also for 3 mana, Greenhouse essentially lets all of your lands tap for 1 mana of any color. That would include oddball lands like Terramorphic Expanse that normally don't tap for mana at all, but do enter play untapped. And heck, even the lower rarity red cards get into the act in this set with the uncommon Piggy Bank, a 2 mana 3/2, that when it dies, it creates a treasure token. And hey, that is a form of fixing. And now let's dive into the specific archetypes presented by Duskmourn, and as is become tradition, I'm going to start with the ugly selections, those that I recommend you try and stay away from. First and foremost is Rooms. This is just a really difficult archetype to try and balance. I'm not saying people can't do it or they won't do it, but really this archetype in particular is going to be a tough balance. It's about having the right rooms as well as the right number of rooms, and to be honest, some of the payoffs are a little bit weak. The Dimir or Eerie Control deck, as the Arena team put it, is going to be a somewhat grindy deck, which in best case is going to mean for some slow, fairly inefficient games that might end up just being kind of swingy and losing out to faster, more aggressive decks like the Boros aggro deck. Overall, the Boros deck got described as aggro, but really it's more along the lines of the little guys matter. There's also some toy sub-themes, and therein, I think, really describes the problem. This particular archetype, this deck, is wanting to be many different things at once, and I'm not sure that it really does any of them particularly well. And now let's switch gears completely and talk about the very best archetypes for us budget players, in my opinion. First off, we've got the Azorius Eerie Tempo deck. This set is just so built around enchantments mattering, the Eerie mechanic. It's hard to go wrong with this deck. I don't necessarily know that it's going to create a new archetype as far as a budget deck, but it certainly has potential, and that potential continues to grow with every new set that continues to get released over the next nearly 3 years, because almost every set is going to have enchantments, even if they don't have the Eerie mechanic themselves. Next up, we've got the Black-Green Delirium grindy deck. And don't forget, the mana fixing in this set is very, very good. So particularly with this Delirium deck, splashing in red could be a very solid idea, particularly for specific cards. I do think the red-black version of Delirium is going to be a bit more popular, which is why we're going to talk about it in Tier 2. Also, Manifest Dread looks to be a particularly powerful mechanic from a card advantage standpoint. There are some low rarity cards in this that really kick up the card advantage hard, and I think this is going to be the #1 deck, not only for the limited environment, but also with potential to create a new budget archetype, as we have had similar mechanics here recently, both in standard as well as the Eternal formats. And last but not least, of course, we've got the, and I quote, bad decks, but potentially still playable. I think of these again as those fallback positions for when your primary plan just doesn't work out. First in the conversation is the Black-White Reanimator deck. I have some concerns about the efficiency of this deck. We certainly have some low rarity ways to bring things back. We have some potentially good reanimation targets, but I'm just not sure it's going to come together in the limited environment. This one might fare better as a constructed deck, and this is the one that has, I think, the most potential to slip down into that Tier 3 ugly, replacing the Boros go wide, little guys, trying to be everything at once deck. From there, we've got the Black-Red Sacrifice deck here. I'm not sure that there's enough sacrifice synergy built within the set, as this is really the only place you see it. And the green and black portions of the color pie are very much dominated by Delirium. This one kind of felt like it should have been a Delirium variant, and it just wasn't. This, however, probably will get better with the release of Foundations, but for right now, I don't think Sacrifice really even contributes to certainly no existing budget deck for Constructed, but maybe a future one. From there, we've got the Red-Green Delirium Stompy. I kind of mentioned this. I think these decks really, in actuality, are going to be more the Black-Green Splash Red. But I do think more people are going to try and build the red-green version. It's probably going to be more highly contested at the table. And then, of course, we've got the survival mechanic that cares about creatures being tapped. I think this is actually top of the tier 2 decks, mostly because it fits so nicely in the existing mounts deck in green-white, as these creatures would just be perfectly happy helping your mounts get saddled. So there you have it, guys. As always, these are my thoughts on the best archetypes for us budget and free-to-play players, but I want to know what you think. So take a moment, get down in the comments, let me know what you think about these observations and what is and isn't working for you. And before we go, while every member of this community is important to me, I just wanted to take a moment and give a shout out to those patrons providing financial support and keeping the Stronghold from being a complete financial black hole. And of course, let me leave you with some suggestions for your next step here on the channel.